All right. Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the American Alpine Club Clubhouse Live. I am Graham Zimmerman, and I'm very delighted to be here with you this evening. And I'm going to be hanging out with my climbing partners from an expedition that we took this last summer to the Pakistani Karakoram to attempt a peak called Linksar to tell you a story about climbing and partnership and shenanigans in the mountains. And just a little kind of like order of operations, what we're going to be up to this evening. We're all going to introduce ourselves. We're going to jump straight to storytelling. We're going to talk about climbing on Linksar for about half an hour, and then we're going to do a Q&A at the end. So feel free to ask questions at the in the comments beneath the Facebook feed there, and we'll get to them once we're done yakking and spinning yarns and whatnot, which should be in about 30 minutes or so. So without further ado, I will pass it off to the first of my climbing partners, Mr. Mark Richey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Richey. Really happy to be here and tell about our climb of Linksar. So I'm from Massachusetts. I live here in Newbury, Mass, with my wife, Teresa. We own and operate a woodworking company here, and I've been climbing since the early 70s. And I pretty much love everything about climbing and all aspects of climbing. I've climbed all over the world, and I hope I can keep climbing for a long time. So I was also a club president back in 2002 and served as a board member. And I think Chris Wright is next.
Yeah, hi, my name's Chris Wright. I'm psyched to be here hanging out with everybody. I put pants on for the occasion. Let's see, I'm a mountain guide. I live in Bend, Oregon. Graham and I are broadcasting from opposite sides of town, though it feels like I'm as far from him as everybody else since we haven't actually seen each other physically in a long time. But anyway, psyched to tell some climbing stories and get to hang out with everybody, even if it's virtual.
Hi, I'm Steve Swenson. I split my time between Canmore, Alberta, where I am right now, and Seattle. I've been climbing for 52 years. And my first trip to the Karakoram was in 1980. I'm a past president of the American Alpine Club, been on the board of directors, and here to tell you some more stories about our Linksar expedition tonight. Thanks for being with us. So Linksar is in the central Karakoram range. It's the part of the Karakoram that's administered by Pakistan. For me, Linksar was a nearly 20-year project, and I'm going to explain why. A lot of it has to do with the politics of the region. The Karakoram is in Kashmir, which is the province in the upper right-hand part of this image. And as you can see, that province of Kashmir is disputed, and it's split up between three different countries. The major antagonists over Kashmir are India and Pakistan, and the Pakistani controlled areas to the left, and the Indian controlled area is to the right. That whole province of Kashmir, there's been several wars that have been fought over that province since partition in 1947 when the British left. And the Karakoram Mountains, which lie right along the province where the word Kashmir is written, have been open and closed to foreigners numerous times, since after World War II. And one of the longest closures was in the 1960s. And when the Karakoram opened up again in 1974, there was a big flood of climbers that went back in, and the first attempt on Lynxar was by Japanese in 1979. Looking at a larger graphic here of the of Kashmir, you can see right in the middle of the graphic is a little triangle called the Siachen Glacier. In the 1980s, India and Pakistan had an argument over who should control this high altitude area of rock and ice. And in 1984, they went to a war over it. And when that happened, the whole area around that part of the Karakoram was closed again, and we couldn't go there. But in 2000, I went to a program at the AAC Clubhouse in Golden. Jimmy Chin was there, and he was giving a slideshow about how they'd gotten a permission in 2000 to go in and do a big wall on a peak that they called the Siachen Tahir Tower. And then he showed me this picture of the major peak in the Kandis Valley called Lynxar, and it got me really interested. It was an unclimbed 7,000 meter peak. So because the troops are getting supplied that are up on the front with India in the Siachen conflict, there's a road that goes up this major glacier, the Kaveri Glacier, that you can see from this Google Earth photo. And we were able to drive in 2001 to our base camp there right across from Lynxar. And on our 2001 trip, I wasn't able to come onto the trip until after a number of the other people showed up because of my business. I was busy at work. But they started up these ledges following the Japanese attempt on the left side of the major glacier that you can see coming off of Lynxar in this photo. And then what they were trying to do, they thought they wanted to do is climb up this couloir that was hidden from view. But when they got up high enough and they could see into it, they could see that that couloir was very threatened by seracs and too dangerous. So they came all the way back down. A number of the members left, but then 2 or 3 of us stayed on and did some exploration on what I thought was the most feasible way up Lynxar via the southeast face, a very complicated way up the southeast face. And we did a reconnaissance up to about 5,000 meters. After that, I went back to Houché, and this is in 2001, remember, so almost 20 years ago. And the person on the right is my friend Rasul, who I've been going with on all my expeditions to Pakistan since 1987, his father. And the young boy on the left there is Fida Ali, who's a character that you'll learn more about later. So in 2004, I applied to go back to Lynxar, but my application was denied. So I went to the Charakusa Valley with Steve House, Marco Prejel, Doug Chabot, Jeff Hollenbaugh, Bruce Miller, and we did the first ascent of that sunshade line, Steve and Marco and I on Nasser Brock. That was the summit. Looking back, what an amazing place that is, with K6 in the background. We also, Steve and Doug Chabot and I did the first ascent of Kapura Peak. And then after that, the 4 of us went, Doug and Steve and Bruce Miller and I drove up and across the Diosai Plain, and Doug and I did the first ascent of the long Mazzano Ridge to where it intersected the Shell route. But then we came down in bad weather, and I also wasn't feeling very well. In 2006, I applied for Lynxar again, and was denied. And this time, Mark Richey, Doug Chabot, and I went to Laytok 2, where we made the first Alpine style ascent of Laytok 2. In 2007, I applied for Lynxar again and was denied again. And this time, Doug and Mark and I went to try the North Ridge of Laytok 1. And then my Pakistani friends told me that I should stop applying for Lynxar because it was a closed area, a high security area. And I'd been to Pakistan so many times in repeated applications to this closed area. They said that the security service in Pakistan might think that I was a spy, and so that I should stop. And so then after that trip to Laytok 1, things in Pakistan I felt were a bit unstable. So Mark and I went in 2009 with a couple of other team members and made an attempt on an unclimbed 7,500 meter peak in the Eastern Karakoram called Sasser Kangri 2. We didn't succeed in 2009. We came back in 2011 with Freddie Wilkinson there, and did the first ascent of Sasser Kangri 2. But in the meantime, John Griffith and a number of different partners was trying to make the first ascent of Lynxar from the Charakusa Valley. I always felt like Lynxar would be climbed from the Condus Valley side, because from the Charakusa side, they were climbing up that glacier that kind of climbs up towards a col on the left side of the photo, and then up that face, which put them on this long ridge line that you'd have to traverse to get over to the summit tower. And it just seemed too long of a route and committing to traverse along that ridge line up at about 7,000 meters. But John Griffith went there and made attempts on Lynxar in 2012, 13, 14, and 15. In 2015, I decided that it was safe to go back to Pakistan again. I think the security situation had improved considerably. But again, I didn't feel like Lynxar was really an option yet. It still seemed like that area was still closed and we wouldn't be able to get a permit. This was my first trip to the Karakoram with Graham. Graham and Scott Bennett and I got a permit for the south face of K6 Central, which is an unclimbed 7,000 meter peak. What we didn't know going into it was that buttress that comes down from the summit. The photos we had didn't show the lower part of the face, and we thought that buttress extended all the way to the bottom and it would provide us a safe route to the summit. But as you can see, it only came down about 2/3 of the way, and there were seracs on both sides that when they would calve off, avalanches would just completely obliterate the lower third of the route. So we thought it was too dangerous, but we were able to go ahead and make the first ascent of that granite peak in the background there, Changi Tower, which is 6,500 meter peak, much like kind of like a Trango Tower, and which was a really amazing, cool climb. The thing about Changi Tower, though, you know, in this photo, you're looking at Lynxar from the Condus Valley, but we climbed Changi Tower from the Lachute Glacier on the other side of it in this photo. But when we got up onto Changi Tower, we could look across there in 2015 at Lynxar. And this was the view that we had. And you could see that long ridge line that John Griffiths and his partners were trying to traverse. I think that the furthest they got was that first little pointy pinnacle on the ridge line there that they called Lynxar West. But that view of Lynxar from this side gave us another perspective of maybe a way to climb it. And in the following year, in 2016, the Pakistanis opened the Lacheet Valley, and I heard that they were going to let trekkers, an Italian team, into the Condas to try to climb Linksar in 2017. So Graham and I applied, and this time Graham is the leader because you know, that would prevent any added security, you know, concerns that the Pakistanis had about me maybe being a spy. And sure enough, we got our permit again in 2017 for me to make my second attempt on Linksar 16 years after when I tried it the first time. And now I'm going to turn it over to Graham to talk about our 2017 attempt.
Hey, everybody. Graham here. Am I off mute? Can everybody hear me okay? All right. So, hey, Graham is here. And it was pretty entertaining for me to be expedition leader on a trip with Steve Swenson at this point. You know, I've been climbing for a long time, but I had been, you know, trying to get to Pakistan for a number of years, and then in 2015 had gone with Steve, and then there we were in 2017 going to this peak Linksar, and I was ostensibly the expedition leader, which was I felt a little bit out of place, as you might imagine, but it meant that we got the permit, which was awesome. And this photo right here is driving into the Condas Valley, and I think this really demonstrates like why this is a place that attracts us. Because it's so pretty. These peaks are so cool. There's not that much snow there. There's really good rock. The peaks are very steep and they're very tall. It's just about perfect for those of us who are really hell-bent on alpine climbing. And for this trip, we decided to invite Chris Wright, who you're going to hear from in just a moment. And Chris and I had been climbing together a lot in Alaska. We actually lived together in Bend. We are now, like Chris said, on opposite sides of town, which is too bad. It would be kind of nice if we were in the same house still, but we're not. But he's an excellent climber. He's a mountain guide who's got a really good head on his shoulders and a really great combination of being willing to try hard and having that grit, but also, you know, being willing to fail and understanding that failure is a really important component to climbing big, hard mountains. And so this is Linksar right here. This is looking up at Linksar from base camp. And you could see that, you know, from that position on the road that Steve was describing earlier, Linksar is way up there. It is more than 10,000 feet above base camp. It might be closer to 12. I have kind of a bad memory for that kind of thing, but it's way, way above base camp. And so we had to go into this process of kind of figuring out how to get to, like, you know, kind of to the proper climbing. And it was a pretty fascinating process in the sense that, you know, Steve had been there, I guess like 16 years before at that point, and he kind of knew how to get up to these meadows, which involved getting up through a bunch of very kind of cliffy, bluffy terrain, what would be very, very well described as ibex pastures, and kind of what really represent the lowest part of kind of the southeast face of Linksar. But since it goes so far down, it kind of drops down into this lower angle terrain. And so we were able to go up there and set up an advanced base camp, which for us was just a very kind of primitive, like couple of small tents on small platforms and a pile of you know, kind of meals ready to eat. And the reason that we kind of got straight onto Linksar is because, as you can see in this photo, this is looking down from the location of that advanced base camp. This is an exceptionally both deep and steep valley. And generally speaking, when we go to a 7,000 meter peak, we would go there and we would find something that was more like 6,000 meters, but was really easy. And we didn't, you know, it wasn't really something that was like an objective that we were fired up about, but was an objective that would allow us to acclimatize. But you can see from this photo and how steep this valley is, that getting up to 6,000 meters is very, very challenging. And so that put us in a position where it's like, well, if we're going to put in all that effort, we may as well just do it on Linksar and go start climbing up and down on the southeast face of Linksar in order to acclimatize and also to try to figure out where the hell we're supposed to go on this huge complex face. And it took us a lot of work to get, even to like what we would consider to be like the real kind of like meat and potatoes of the climbing. This here is Steve rock climbing on a buttress down lower. We spent about a 3-week period just trying to figure out where to go, how to get to the upper mountain, basically how to get to the cover this ground that was between where Steve had reached in his kind of reconnaissance in 2016 and the base of the real peak where we could see that it's like the line became much more obvious. And this is a little higher up in the process. This looks like we're almost there. Actually, you can see that kind of like that sort of basin that's in the background there was kind of where we were trying to get to. But this is actually another dead end, and it was pretty entertaining because I described this as ibex pasture before, but as it turned out, what we really needed to do to get through this terrain was follow the ibex sign, figure out kind of where they had been traveling through, and that led us onto a good path to reach this upper glacier. And the thing that was blocking us from this, and I think this photo demonstrates that pretty well. It wasn't really technical ground. Dealing with hard climbing was fine. It was all these seracs, and the kind of one of the challenges, particularly in the lower section of this route, was finding a way to get to the upper portion of the mountain on which we felt like we could safely travel. And we could have taken some pretty large risks and just kind of gotten through it, but that wasn't something we were willing to do. So we put in the time in order to figure out the best way to get there. So at this point, we eventually we did figure out how to reach kind of what we kind of were considering the upper mountain in quotes. And I stuck this photo in here. This is a peak along the AGPL called the actual ground position line, which is kind of the contested border between Pakistan and India. This is looking over at Saltoro Congree, and it just gives you an idea of how stunning this area is and why we are so inspired to go there. And eventually on this trip, we did make it to 6,000 meters. We did most of that climbing in the evening, so we don't have a lot of great photos from it. And you could suppose that maybe later in the presentation there will be some photos of that hard climbing, maybe. But we made it to 6,000. We made it to 6,000 meters, and at that point, we kind of knew where to go to get to within 1,000 meters of the summit, which at that point felt pretty close, considering that base camp was thousands and thousands of meters below us. And so we were acclimatized, we were ready to go, and we felt like we were in pretty good position. At that point in the trip, the weather really changed, and the weather hadn't been particularly good during this expedition. But during kind of once we had reached that point in the trip, it became quite bad, and we spent a lot of time. We spent a lot of time bouldering. We spent a lot of time hanging out. And it's interesting. I think it's kind of a good time now, as we're all stuck at home, as we're all stuck in base camp, if you will, to kind of talk about the fact that like this is a negative. This is a time in the trip when we're like challenged because we can't do anything. But it's also this is something that happens. This is something that happens on expeditions, and so during this is great. This was time we were able to sit back, think about what was going on at home, think about what was going on in our lives, relationships, careers, and in climbing, and really work on that stuff. Have a really open palette to work on the rest of our lives. But eventually, near the end of the trip, it was actually right at the end of the trip, we actually called our girlfriends and told them, our girlfriends and wives, that we were going to be coming home late because we had one last chance to send Linksar. And it's a long story that I won't get into, but it actually resulted in me getting a dog that I was not very happy about at the time, but I am happy about now. And Steve, due to a variety of reasons, decided to hang back. Chris and I launched on Linksar. The weather window was coming. Our forecaster in Jackson told us, like, go for it. I guess actually he said tentatively, like, I think it looks like you might have a window. You might as well go up there and see. But the final climb, the final attempt looked like this. And, you know, as you might suppose, this is not what we're looking for, particularly when I think this photo was taken at about 5,500 meters. So we had a long, long way to go, and the weather was not getting better. And we ended up turning around. And I think that, you know, it's really interesting for us to consider, you know, this 2017 expedition, particularly now, because it felt like a failure when we came home. It felt like we went to the Karakoram and we got our ass kicked. And in many ways we did. But we were also trying a very complex, big, hard objective. And we solved a lot of problems. We unlocked a lot of that peak's secrets. And it really set us up for if and when we wanted to return, that we knew where to go, we knew how to do it, and we could design a far better strategy for how to get out the mountain and hopefully be successful. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Chris.
Cool. So Chris here. So, you know, Graham said we thought we figured some things out if we wanted to return. And to be honest, there wasn't that much of an if there. I think that, you know, as soon as we were done in 2017, both myself and Graham and Steve all kind of felt like, okay, we figured out a lot of things about how to climb this mountain. And if I'm honest, we kind of thought we'd broken the back of it. What we learned on this trip that was successful in 2019 was that we hadn't seen the half of it yet. But anyway, we knew that we were going to go back and we were going to take those lessons that we learned and we were going to do a few things differently. One of the things that we did differently was we brought along this guy, Mr. Mark Richey, who was an old-time climbing partner of Steve's, and they'd done a ton of climbing together in the mountains. And we thought having a little bit more manpower and kind of another body to put in the immense amount of work it was going to take to climb this mountain would be really useful. And the other thing that we knew we were going to do was change our strategy a little bit. What you're looking at in this photo is kind of the upper mountain. And when we had been there in 2017, we base camped down 12, I think it was just about 12,000 feet below the summit. And our advanced base camp was really poorly stocked. So we had to do a lot of rushing between them. And you couldn't really sit comfortably kind of at the bottom of this photo to attack all of the difficulties above. So we thought the best way to do it would be to have a much better stocked ABC up in those ibex pastures and work our way up the mountain from there. The only problem was that once we got there, we found that the ibex pastures were not exactly ibex pastures because they had such a heavy winter that everything was covered in meters of snow. This is Steve pointing at the cairn that marked our last camp, which I think at our camp from 2017, which I think was under like 3 meters of snow at this point. And you can see how impressed Mark was with our stories about grassy fields and comfortable living up there. So, you know, we initially just had to contend with all this snow. And if you look at this photo, our base camp is like even below that line and on the other side of the glacier. So we had our work cut out for us. The first thing we started to do was cairning our way across the glacier. And then we had to figure out how to get the supplies up to that advanced base camp, because last time we just carried things ourselves because we didn't take much. This time we knew that it would be to our advantage to use some local porters. But to get them up all of that terrain, we had to spend ages stringing up this network of fixed lines and anchors just to be able to get them up into the grassy fields, which by the time we got up there were beginning to melt out. But setting up our advanced base camp still required a fairly ludicrous amount of digging. And, you know, while my partner was at home running around the Cascades telling me about all the wonderful things she'd climbed, I kind of relayed, well, I've been digging in the mud for the last 3 or 4 days and building platforms out of mud and rocks, and it's going swimmingly over here. But eventually it did melt enough that we were able to kind of establish a pretty comfy camp in this kind of safe area. And it was actually really good because we needed that time for all the snow to melt and for the mountain to really get into climbable condition, because there were a lot of avalanches and a lot of deep snow. And even if it would have been climbable, it wouldn't have been safe. So by the time we got this base camp established, it was July 4th. By the time we even started establishing it, was July 4th, and we were a month into the expedition already. And then after that, we got to set about the task of actually trying to climb the thing. As Graham said, we learned in 2017, there was no good acclimatization objective. So we decided to climb on the mountain. So once we had ABC established, we knew that we could climb up to that first bivvy, kind of below that main head wall, and then even climb through to the second bivvy, and then come back down, and hopefully that would leave us as acclimatized as we were going to get. So we actually had some pretty great weather this year, unprecedentedly good weather to acclimatize with. The climbing on the lower part of the mountain was relatively easy. But once we got a little bit higher, it started to steepen up and get into a lot more serious technical terrain. It doesn't actually go up this terrain that we're looking at. We kind of snuck through that buttress to the right of the screen via the same gully system that we'd taken in 2017. And that involved a bunch of sort of pretty difficult technical mixed climbing, which we did most of it at night to avoid the heat of the day and things melting and falling apart because we were still really low. And eventually that gave way to some kind of easier snow slopes, and that put us at the spot at above kind of the difficulties here next to that main rock tower in the center. And we kind of stared up at the mountain for a few weeks, waiting for a good enough weather window to come that we could climb it again. It was a little painful because we had absolutely perfect weather during the acclimatization period, which again, we knew we needed, but waiting for those windows can be really brutal, especially when we knew we needed a pretty big window for this one. And ideally we wanted a week or more of good weather to get all the way up and back down safely, which doesn't happen that much in the Karakoram. So eventually, after just staring out of our tents for a few weeks, our forecaster said, well, you got a pretty decent window. You got like 4 days that are going to be good, a couple days, maybe day and a half of a light storm, and then it looks good after that. So we were running out of the trip time on the trip already. You plan these trips for 8 to 10 weeks, and it seems like, man, how are we going to use up all that time? But it goes by so fast that we decided, instead of sitting around in the good weather we have now, let's go up there and let's just go heavy enough so that we can sit out that little bit of bad weather and then hopefully keep going up to the top and back down afterwards in the good weather. So I think it must have been somewhere around the end of July. I can't remember now. Or was it August? I don't know. We set off and climbed back on our way up through the lower mountain. And one of the first new cruxes for us was figuring out how to get around this big serac in front of me in this photo. This is at about 6,200 meters. So we climbed up to this point before in our acclimatization. And again, we've kind of been up here in 2017, but after that, it was new. So we were pretty excited to find a pretty nice way around. This is Graham looking psyched after finding a nice little bridge that took us across that serac. And then some easy climbing led us on up to this bivouac, which we knew was going to be where we'd wait out the storm, which was really excellent because you can see it's on a little promontory. It looks like that wall behind us is close, but nothing was close enough to be threatening, which was great. So we sat out the bad weather and we left camp just as the weather was improving or allegedly going to improve, and it didn't. So there we were above our camp, kind of shooting off into uncharted terrain in the middle of the night, and the weather was awful. We had some major doubts about continuing, and then Graham had the great idea that maybe we should dig a hole and crawl in it and wait for the weather to improve. Took a long time to dig the hole, Weather improved in about 20 minutes of sitting. Spirits improved as well, and up we went. And after that, we encountered some really excellent climbing through the rock band above us, some really fine water ice pitches, which quickly gave way to sloggy, awful snow pitches, which were going to be the namesake of the climb. But they did bring us up to the spot where you can see here labeled as Bivvy 4. So we were really close to the summit. And we had an awesome camp where we could kind of look up and see the summit less than 1,000 vertical feet away. It looked really close at the time. So we set out the next day, again, great weather. You can see our camp behind us here. Once again, climbed some really excellent terrain. And again, that's the summit looking tantalizingly close in the background. Made our way up some snow slopes adjacent to the summit ridge. We soon kind of got bogged back down in funky, weird, deep snow. Nothing that had seemed like it was dangerous. It was just a lot of work to get through this stuff. And you can see my trench here that Steve's plowing up behind. And so Graham and I had been doing most of the leading just because it seemed like we could do it a little bit faster and efficiently. So I'd been in the lead all day so far, and had a hard time moving up the snow, had a hard time finding anchors. Eventually finished my block with an awesome set of ice screws that I'd dug out of the snow. And that's when I turned the lead over to Graham. And to continue from here, I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Thanks, Chris. So yeah, so Chris had been leading all day, and as Chris mentioned, he and Graham really did all the hard leading on the climb. So Graham took over, and I was blowing Steve up as Graham was traversing across this pitch, and all of a sudden, that unmistakable sound and the scream from Chris, "Avalanche!" And we were immediately hit by a wave of concrete-like snow that piled up on top of us and stretched our ropes and pulled us against the anchor. And the first thought that went through my mind is, we're going to rip the anchor out and we're all going to die. And the second thought that went through my mind is, oh shit, when's the big stuff going to hit us? And then it was over. And the avalanche passed us by. It was actually probably pretty small slab avalanche that hit us, but things were not okay. The rope to Graham, who had been leading, was bowstring tight and went directly to the right, to the left, about 40 feet, and then disappeared straight down. And we screamed and yelled for Graham, but no answer. And of course, the worst thoughts went through our mind. He's either seriously injured or dead. And so Steve, who had come up last and was ready to go, traversed over to where the rope disappeared and set up an anchor and yelled down, nothing still. And then finally, a faint sound of, "I'm okay," from Graham. And we were so relieved. He had taken a 100-foot leader fall. He had been ripped off from the slope by the avalanche and fallen 100 feet and overhang, and was hanging upside down. And he needed to prusik up one of the lines to get back up to where Steve was. Meanwhile, Chris and I were getting ready to descend. We're setting V-threads as we assumed it was all over. Miraculously, Graham was completely uninjured. And when he got up to Steve and they hugged and we all screamed with joy that no one was injured, Graham said, "I'm pretty shooken up, but if you guys want to go, I want to keep going." And it was music to our ears. I couldn't believe it, frankly, the courage that took and the strength and the determination after taking that kind of a fall and to want to go on is just testament to the kind of gritty, tough climber that Graham is. And so Chris agreed to take back over the lead. Mind he'd already led all day. And next slide. And there's the look that sort of says it all from Graham after his fall and his recovery, but really showed his toughness to want to continue. Next slide. So continue we did with Chris in the lead, and the climbing got better. We found really good ice on the left part of the face, and we were really close. You could taste it now. We couldn't have been more than 150 meters from the summit. And each pitch got us just that much closer, and we were all really psyched. The weather was starting to turn a little bit, but we really felt we had this one in the bag. And then Chris got to what we hoped would be the last pitch, and he started up what was pretty good terrain, and then it quickly turned to really bad snow again. And it was just this sort of deep, bottomless, impossible to protect snow. Digging away, trenching away. Meanwhile, the three of us, Chris, Steve, Graham, Steve, and I are pretty much belaying off Graham, who's dug a big hole into the side of the mountain, because there's no ice here and there's no real anchors. So we're just sort of, dug in for the belay. And Chris is up there digging around, and he's been at it all day long. And he's finally just sort of stalls out. And he says, I can't make any more progress. He yells down to us. And Steve says, well, we're probably on a big cornice. We may just have to call it good here. But Chris wasn't buying it. He says, no, the summit's still up there. I know it, but maybe somebody else could give it a try. And Graham said to me, he says, I want Mark to go up there. He's had a lot of experience in Peru with this kind of snow. So Chris came down, and we swapped ends quickly. I stripped down to just my shell so I could be light and nimble, and up I went. And honestly, I really didn't think I was doing anything but going up there and confirming that we were at the end of the line, and we were going to have to call it good at wherever we were, and we weren't going to really stand on the summit. But when I got up to Chris's high point, I started digging around, and I began trenching into the mountain, deep, almost tunneling into the side of the mountain. And I found that as I dug deep into the mountain, I could kind of make almost a trench that I could chimney along. And I was making very slow progress, but progress nonetheless. But then I began to worry that I could fall over backwards and and of course, the fall that Graham had taken earlier was fresh on all our minds. And there was only one screw that Chris had placed earlier on the pitch. And meanwhile, Steve is furiously digging away at the belay, trying to find screws for a proper belay. And then the other thing that worried me was that maybe indeed it was a cornice we were coming up. And at any moment, I could punch through the other side and fall over it into a giant abyss. And this is precisely what had happened to me in 1978 on another mountain named Chacarahu with Steve Brewer. After 3 days waiting on the ridge of this mountain, I had broken through a cornice and dragged Steve along the ridge. And had he not been on the other side of the ridge, we would have both perished. But we did survive that. And almost 40 years ago, 40 years forward, and here we are again. So back on Linksar, Steve furiously digging away, looking for belay, and I'm inching my way up. At one point, I think maybe it was Graham said, it's probably a cornice, we should probably call it. And then the snow started to stiffen just a little bit, and a slight horizon appeared above me. And I was able to get to my knees and crawl just a few more meters. And then all of a sudden, Next slide. All of a sudden, nope, back one. There was nowhere else to go. And there we were on top, on one of the most perfect summits I have ever stood on in my life, about 10 feet wide, maybe 20 feet long, perfectly flat, overhung on all sides. I was overcome with joy and relief for having finally gotten through this and survived. And here we were. And the first thing I did is scream down to my partners, I'm on the top. I'm on the fucking top. Then there was a brief moment of silence, maybe they didn't believe it. And then cheers and applause from my companions. And then, is there room up there for us? Because they couldn't see me. And of course there was. And quickly, we were all joined on the top. First, Chris Wright. We hugged each other and screamed into the magnificent views of the Karakoram all around us, the greatest mountains on earth. And I was so happy. Chris had worked incredibly hard on this climb and put in an amazing Herculean effort that day and the days before. And Graham, and shortly afterwards, Steve joined us, and I felt so happy for Steve. He had the vision for this climb. He had spent nearly 6 months of his life on the glacier trying to climb this, and nearly 20 years had lapsed since his first attempt. And I was just so happy to be there on this mountain, both of us in the twilight of our climbing careers. And finally, Graham, who had just an incredible day, had taken this horrific fall and had the fortitude to continue. And I was so proud of him, so proud to be there with all the team. And to see these two young men, such incredible climbers, to be on top of this amazing mountain. And we were only there for maybe a half an hour together as it was getting dark, and we were able to just enjoy those last moments of an amazing Alpine glow, surrounded by the greatest mountains on earth. And then we began our descent in the dark. I remember my headlamp had given out, and Chris had to help me out setting up rappels. And it was a team effort, and we were exhausted both mentally and physically, and arrived back at our high camp about 3 or 4 in the morning, totally exhausted, but totally satisfied and happy with our success. And it would still be 3 more days before we would actually make it all the way back down to base camp as we descended this long and complex mountain. Next slide, Graham. And carried all our equipment that we had spread out over a couple of camps. And finally back at base camp. And these photographs were taken by Graham and Chris just after reaching our advanced base camp. And you can still see the intensity in our eyes and the puffiness in our faces from the altitude and the sun. And I can't say enough about these two young men, just incredible climbers, incredible companions. And of course, my longtime friend and climbing partner, Steve Swenson. I can't think of anybody I'd rather be on a big mountain like this than Steve and Chris and Graham. And it was an amazing accomplishment. And I'm really honored and proud to be part of this team. And, especially all the hard work Steve and Chris and Graham did in preparing for this climb. It was just an amazingly satisfying summit for me and for all of us. And I can't forget the rest of our team who were equally as important to our success. Of course, Rasul on the bottom right there, who's been our our friend and brother and cook on every expedition we've done to Pakistan, all of us. And his son, Feed Ali, and Nadeem in between Steve. And then in the back on the right, Umair, our liaison officer, who was frankly, I think, the best liaison officer, a young captain in the Army that I've ever had on a trip to the Karakoram. So finally, one last look at our climb, Saskakangre, and the route we took up it. Extraordinarily complex mountain, no easy way up it, no real safe way up it. We struggled a bit in coming up with the grade M6 plus, winter ice 4, 90 degrees snow, but it really doesn't tell the story. It needs something else, like an X afterwards, or a BA for badass or something. But this was really one of the most complex and challenging mountains I've ever climbed. I'd have to say the most complex mountain I've ever been on in my nearly 50 years of climbing. So very proud of what we accomplished. And on that note, I'm going to hand it back to Graham. That's the end of our show. And I think he's going to begin the question and answer period. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mark. It's like, I mean, I guess I was there, but that was really special to hear. And guys, this is really, I mean, I think that all of us would rather be sharing this with you in person, but it's pretty sweet to be sharing this, you know, over the internet, and you know, keeping you all entertained while we're all stuck inside here. So we have some questions that have come in. The first one is from Jessica B. How do you manage risk on such a massive peak? And I guess we should probably like pitch this off to the old guys, if that's right with you two.
Well, maybe I'll start off. Managing risk. Well, I think the first thing is what Graham said earlier was you have to be willing to fail. It was my third attempt. You know, when we climbed, I made 2 previous attempts before we climbed it the first time, and you know, so we were willing to fail. We made mistakes. We learned from our mistakes, and like Chris was talking about, you know, so every time you come back, you can have a little bit different strategy, so that as you go along, you know, you're feeling good about what you're doing. You're making good decisions. This was like Mark was saying, we had such an incredible team. I think that between the 4 of us, we had something like about 130 years of combined climbing experience. And, you know, so there's so much depth to this team to try to make decisions about how to manage risk. And every time we came, had a problem, we discuss it. Sometimes we discuss it over days, and we change our minds several times because there was no competition amongst all of us. You know, it was all very much, open and transparent, and everybody listened. And, I think that's how you manage risk, and you just kind of take it one little bit at a time, you know, and I think that without the 4 people that were on this team, with the combined experience that they had, and how we made decisions together, I can't imagine how climbing this peak that we would have been able to do it safely. There was just so many things that we faced that that would have been easy to turn us back, and almost did. But here we are, and like Mark said, I think I agree, it's one of the most complicated mountains I've ever climbed.
Yeah. Am I unmuted? So I'd have to echo what Steve said. I think he said it all pretty much. And what I have to say is, for a team that was really made up of an old guard and the young guys, we really were able to tap into each other's strengths and support each other really well. And I think we listened to each other. And, there was no competitiveness. It was just a real team effort. And I think that made assessing risk and making the right decisions easier, because we were really looking out for each other and we cared about each other. And, all of us wanted to climb this thing, but we wanted to survive. And the fact of the matter is that it is a dangerous mountain. There's not an easy, safe way up this mountain. And so there was a lot of risk that we had to weigh and manage.
And I'll just jump in to say that, it's interesting. I think that when we think about climbing teams, we oftentimes think about going to the biggest, hardest things that we try with people. I mean, I guess particularly for Chris and I, like, if you had asked me 10 years ago, like, who will you do your hardest climbs with? I probably would have assumed with people that were my age. And it's been really interesting. This team was such a perfect, was really such a perfect team for this objective, because, the technical climbing on this route, while it was hard and while there was a lot of it, it was realistically, it was only a portion of what we had to get done. I mean, between the permitting and the risk management and the strategy and all this stuff that had to go into this climb. Like Chris and I led the cruxes, but of technical terrain. But I would say that many of the cruxes of this route had nothing to do with hard climbing. And then when it all came down to it, we were at this moment at the top where we had to lean into this like old school experience of climbing like super haggard, steep snow. And Mark was like prime for it from all his experience climbing in South America. So that was pretty special. So I think that this kind of follows up nicely. Like, what did we down climb? The next question is from Doug T. Did we down climb that last pitch? And then another question of how did we belay each other off the summit? So Mark, why don't I toss that off to you?
Okay, so actually, I was the last one off, so I think we all sort of down climbed it with a body belay, by that point though, the trough was pretty good, and it was not too bad going down. I remember going down in the dark, and it just seemed so much easier to go down than to go up. But yeah, we down climbed it. We didn't start rappelling until the next pitch.
All right, so the next question is specifically for Chris, from James W. Chris, are you bringing the expedition beard back?
No, nobody wants that. I'll definitely say that. I brought back a mild iteration of it in the quarantine beard, and I was told it was scratchy, and I mean, nobody, including myself, is under the illusion that that looks good. So no.
Oh, I liked it.
James W. That was an important question. All right, so this is one for like everybody that I think we each get the answer. From ENT. What an amazing story and incredible mountain. Could you guys each talk a little bit about your first true Alpine experience? Why don't we go back to Steve and then we can kind of cycle through.
My first Alpine experience was in 1968 when I was a Boy Scout and we climbed Mount St. Helens before, in the Pacific Northwest, before it blew up. And we camped at this place called the Dog's Head, and we had this huge storm at night that blew down everyone's tents, and everybody had a miserable night. And in the morning, it was a beautiful day, and everybody's like, well, maybe we should go down. We had a bad night. And I just felt like, no, we should keep going. It's really nice weather now. And we did. We went up and got to the top.
Nice. What about you, Chris?
I was thinking about that, and I'm not sure that my first Alpine experience is, I've skied my whole life and been in the mountains. So I I think the first experience I had with climbing that was meaningful was in college. My buddy Al asked me if I wanted to go rock climbing, and I knew it was a thing, but I didn't know what carabiners were. And, you know, I thought you had to wear gym shorts, and we went to the gunks to top rope something, and we tied, you know, 1-inch webbing and ovals around a tree. And when we'd slip off the route because it's so steep, we'd swing into a tree. I remember thinking simultaneously, man, I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing, but this is awesome. I got to do more of it. So that was kind of my first climbing experience, and that's what got me hooked, though it wasn't really in the mountains.
Alpine is what you make it. What about you, Mark?
Exactly.
Well, I grew up climbing in New Hampshire, you know, winter, all kinds of, you know, Alpine experiences. My real first Alpine experience was in, I was a junior in high school, and we went out west and climbed all over the, you know, from Yosemite up to the Canadian Rockies. And I remember a trip in the Bugaboos, and we were trying a new route on south face of Snowpatch Spire in Big Wall style. And we got into a storm, and we were in hammocks, and it rained, snowed, and meltwater all night long and filled our hammocks up. I remember having to cut a big hole in my hammock to let the water drip through. And then in the morning, my sleeping bag was so full of water, I tried to throw it to my friend Pete Cole to put it into the haul bag, and I only threw it about a foot, and it needed to go 4 feet, and it fell off the mountain, and that was the end of my sleeping bag. But yeah, it was good. Yeah, we kept going though.
And I guess what is my first Alpine? I mean, what is Alpine? What is an Alpine experience? Apparently it can range from goofing around with ropes to being stuck on Snowpatch Spire. I started climbing in the Pacific Northwest, but I feel like I've been reflecting on that sense of like, this is what you wanted, this is what you get. And maybe that for me represents like Alpine climbing, when it's like, wow, why was this a good idea? And I think I first experienced that in the Alpine, in the Southern Alps in New Zealand, when I moved down there when I was 18. Like, wow, you really put a lot of work into making sure that you were really uncomfortable. And I think it was probably on like south face of Cook or something like that. But I would say that's probably when I first like really understood what it means to go Alpine climbing. Okay, so let's see. Deanne B is asking, Graham, were you aware of what was happening when the avalanche hit? I don't know. Kind of. It was one of those, like, I thought I was hallucinating. It's like, it's this really interesting headspace when you're starting a block and you're kind of like, cool, time to like lock in, time to go, time to charge. And then it was like, wow, am I kind of like hallucinating a little bit? The snow seems to be moving past me. This is like head down, like charging uphill. And then pretty quickly, I think I was just sliding downhill swearing. I don't know. And then, you know, the rest, I guess we could say the rest is history, and history turned out okay. So we're psyched about that. All right. So Jacob R is asking, are you guys staying in big mountain shape these days? If so, how? Or have you succumbed to the quarantine bod? What do you guys think? Are we really fit right now, or do we have the quarantine bod?
Cheers.
I'm trying my best. I'm doing a lot of running, and I'm learning what a lousy rock climber I am in my garage on a campus board. But I am not succumbing yet, though I am eating more cookies and drinking more beer than normal. If that's my answer.
I would say I have quarantine bod totally, but I wouldn't say I'm in big mountain shape either. Here in Canmore, we're lucky because I have, 4,000 feet of elevation on a couple of peaks in my backyard that I can go hike up to the top. Or, it's pretty snowy here still, but I can sort of get out and go trail running and kind of do a fast hike up some of these hills, and then kind of like Chris, I can hang on my hangboard downstairs, and mostly maintenance stuff, but not training for a big mountain like I was last year.
And I just want to add that getting into big mountain shape is such a miserable process that nobody wants to do it unless they're going to a big mountain sometime soon, which I'm not. So I'm not in big mountain shape, and I won't be until next year. So no, definitely not.
I think that's pretty fair. I'm like, normally I work out with timers a lot to like keep me on track. But I've not been using timers recently. I just kind of like go at the pace that feels reasonable for my mental state. But I don't know.
I want to go rock.
Yeah, I guess it's funny. Like Chris and I both live in Bend, but we have independently built campus boards in our garages to, try to get better at rock climbing because climbing Linksar is really shitty for your rock climbing.
Yeah, that was older.
All right, so Jessica B is wondering, what did your security detail entail? Was it mandated by the government? So Steve, you're the guy with all the you're the guy that with all the background and kind of logistics. Why don't you jump into that?
In Pakistan, we don't have a security detail. There's when you fly from Islamabad to Skardu is the capital of Baltistan. The people there, the type of Muslims they are, and kind of the ethnic group that you're with there, they're completely welcoming and peaceful. And I would highly recommend it for people to climb and trek there. I think it's completely safe right now, and we didn't really have any issues or concerns in that regard.
Perfect. Yeah, it's. I mean, I will say for my part, I spent years trying to apply for permits to Pakistan and failed because of security issues and things like that. And I was very ready for Pakistan to feel unsafe, for it to be a place that seemed, like where we really had to stay on our toes. And my experience there has been the opposite. It's welcoming. It's beautiful. There are parts of Pakistan you certainly do not want to go to. But fly into Islamabad, kind of keep it low key, and then go up to Gilgit-Baltistan, Skardu, and all that. It's great. Let's see. So we've got a couple more questions here, and then we'll sign off. Let's see. This is like an easy technical one. What type of boots do you wear for 7,000 meter peaks? I think we had two different kinds of boots on the trip. Why don't we just say what they were?
Well, so I think we're all wearing like a double boot, but it's really kind of a triple boot. It's got an insulated liner that's removable and an insulated gaiter that's integral to it. I think myself and Mark were both in the Sportiva, what do they call that? The G2SM?
G2, whatever it is.
G2SM. And Graham and Steve were in the Scarpa Phantom 6000, which works fine at 7,000. So basically the second biggest boot you can get, not the 8,000 meter boot, but the one down.
Yeah, it's worth noting that Pakistan, we're climbing there in the summer, and it tends to be a pretty warm range. So it's like, I don't know, it wasn't like that cold. I've tended to have gotten a lot colder in other mountain ranges. And then if you look at climbing in Nepal, you're oftentimes climbing in Nepal in like the the pre and post monsoon, which are not during the summer. They're during a much colder time of year. So climbing in summer in Pakistan can be pretty comfortable. Let's see. So we got two more that we'll bang off. Yeah.
Mark? I think you had 4 pairs of boots, didn't you, Graham?
Yeah, I brought a lot of boots.
But
I mean, we started at like 3,400 meters.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, you're right.
I would say I spent the predominance of the expedition in Crocs.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So we've got one more good question here, which is, and we can just kind of ring around and talk about this, which is, are we all full-time climbers / athletes, or do we have a day job, and how do we get the time to get off? And I think it's a really like important question to answer for people who like want to get at this kind of thing. So why don't we just kind of spin around and like, just give a quick description of how we make this work out. Mark, you want to start?
Oh yeah, sure. So I have a full-time job. I run a large relatively large architectural woodworking company with my wife. And even though we're not the only ones running it, we play a big role in it. So, and I've always worked in outside of climbing, but have sort of had a second career as a climber because I've spent a lot of time climbing. And I've been lucky to have really good people, starting with my wife, to run the company when I'm away for 2-3 months a year, which is something I've done a lot of. So I'm very grateful for that.
What about you, Steve?
Well, I'm retired now, but I spent 35 years as a engineering consultant, and was able to manage things. It's a much longer story than what I could tell here, to get time off every year to go on expeditions. And I had, wonderful support from my colleagues there over those many years. My family, my wife, Ann, both my sons, Lars and Jed, they've been incredibly supportive. So I feel really fortunate. I didn't make money as a professional climber. And when I first started climbing, that didn't really even exist. Kind of the whole professional athlete climber didn't really start in the United States until the early 90s. And I was well into my career by that point.
Chris?
I work full-time as a mountain guide, so I work taking other people climbing and skiing. And one of the main advantages of that job is the flexibility. So it does allow for me to take time off to go climbing for myself occasionally, as long as I work my ass off the next year to pay for it, unless of course there's a pandemic, but you can't plan for that.
You cannot plan for the pandemic. And then,
but if you want to go climbing when it's over, let me know.
In the meantime, we have the campus boards. And then I do kind of do the professional athlete thing. I mean, I guess I do that, but it's on top of also running a film production company, Bedrock Filmworks, that I run with my business partner, Jim. And he's very patient with me for, going and skipping off to big mountains for a summer at a time. I should also mention my wife is very patient with me. I think all our lovely partners are. But that's, yeah, it's interesting. I think that something you'll see kind of across the board with this team is, as having built lifestyles that allow us to go climbing and go try these big things, but there's really no requirement to, and there's no requirement to try anything in particular. And I think it's part of the reason why this works so well is like Linksar is something that we all really wanted to do, and we all put a lot of work into that, and that that went far beyond training and things like that. That went into like our careers, that went into our relationships and all that kind of stuff. And to try to really get these things done and to do them safely, you need to really want it. And that's something that we've all put a lot of work into, is like that foundation that allows us to do that, which is a really important thing to consider when it comes to these big objectives. And the last question is, what is the next thing for the team? And I think the next team is you guys can argue with me if you want, but I think our goal is to get the hell out of quarantine and drink beer together in person. Is that fair?
Yay.
Yeah. Be nice to go climbing again, but
all right. Anything else you guys want to share, or should we let these poor people get back to their evenings?
No, just thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for joining. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for listening. It was fun.
Yeah.
Great to see all you guys.
You guys have been awesome. Thanks for joining us at the AAC Clubhouse. This is actually like a weekly thing that we're doing. So tune back in next Thursday, and it sounds like they've got a session dialed in with the power couple of climbing, Emily Harrington and Adrienne Ballinger. And for more info on that, you can go to the American Alpine Club website or their Facebook. And we got to get the plug in there. If you enjoyed this session and it is within your means, if it's within your means, consider making a small donation to the AAC. You can text uniting, UNITING, to 44321. And with that, thanks for being here. You guys are awesome. Stay safe, be smart, kick ass. We'll see you soon.